have our what is it? Our thirds, our lower thirds are due today. So make sure by the end of the day we have our lower thirds turned in. If you're finished with those, I want to go on to the next part so you can see what the next assignment's going to be. This is where we're going to start getting into a different level of After Effects, which is doing 3D stuff. Okay, so far we've been dealing with 2D, moving things left and right and moving things up and down, but now we're actually going to have a depth to our items. Okay, so just so we can see how this is set up in After Effects, it's really just a button click to turn something from a 2D item to a 3D item, but we want to make it a little bit more interactive in what we're doing, a little more updatable. One of the programs we'll be using is Illustrator. This program's not going to go away, so if you're not comfortable with Illustrator from doing like the thing with the lower thirds, the little logo, you may want to revisit some Illustrator tutorials and keep playing with Illustrator. We're going to use Photoshop a smidge. Most of the stuff we're going to be doing is going to be done in Illustrator so that we can draw the stuff out here and then bring it into After Effects. And that's just a common workflow that people do in industry, is everything's drawn in Illustrator, set up in Illustrator, and then just brought into After Effects to animate. Okay? All right, so just to show an example, I'm going to make a new composition, and I'm going to make a new solid. All right, so here's my solid, and if I hit the P key, you can see I can move this up and down, and I can move it left and right. So now what I want to do is actually change the depth of it. I want to make it look like it's far away and then coming closer to us. All right, so if you look down here in this bar, you'll see there's a little cube in that bar. That little cube means make this item 3D. So within our composition, we could have one item being 3D and one item not being 3D. So it doesn't turn on for everything, just that one item. So if I say make this item 3D, now it's 3D. Okay? And so what I get is my position now has three numbers. It says 960, 540, and 0. I also have rotations here, orientation, and then if I hit the R key, it does not show my other one, I'll have an X, Y, and Z rotation. Okay? Now this is going to be a bit confusing to you if you've never done anything 3D before, but it will come once you start playing with it. Okay? So the biggest thing is if we look at this icon, you'll see there's a red, green, and a blue. So red, green, and blue in any 3D app means X, Y, and Z. RGB, X, Y, Z. That's always how they coincide. So the red is always going to be the X direction, the green is always going to be the Y, and the blue, which is kind of hard to see, it's right there, is going to be the Z direction. Okay? And Z in this case is always going to move closer or further away from the camera. All right, when we're talking about position. When we look at the rotation, it's talking about the axis that it's rotating around. So if this is our plane right here, and we have the X direction pointing this way, if I rotated X, it's going to rotate that way. Okay? So you just imagine a pole going like right through here, and that's the X, and that's how it's going to pivot around. If this is the Y, it's going to come straight up and down, so it's going to pivot this way. And then if this is Z, it would pivot that way. So you can see all the different ways that we can rotate this specific item. When we talk about position, we're dealing with very, very similar things. We still have the X, we still have the Y, and we still have the Z. Now, as we get our arrow on top of this, you'll see that the item is actually changing. So as I move up here, it says Y. As I move over here, it says X. As I move right there, it says Z. So it's picking up those different items that I would be able to move it in those directions. Now, most of the time, I don't touch the arrows because it's kind of hard to move around and get it where I want. Most of the time with 3D stuff, I'll just jump down here and play with these things. Okay? So if I want to push this thing further away from the camera, I'm going to go to the Z, which is the last number, and click and drag. So as I push this further and further and further, it looks like it's getting smaller, but what's actually happening is it's getting further away from the camera, which makes it look smaller. All right? So this is where the neat thing about 3D can come in, because if I made another solid, and I'll color this maybe a little bit darker. I made this one 3D. I hit P for position, and I brought this over here. Brought this over there. Okay, so now we're starting to layer things. So that we have this item that's kind of close, another item that's a bit further away. I can duplicate this item and just push one of these really, really far away. And I'll also push it over. So this way I'm using the arrows just to kind of position it. And solid settings, make this a different color. Okay, so now we see 3 items all at different spaces, okay? Once we switch over from a 2D environment into a 3D environment, our layer stacking order does not matter as much, okay? So what that means is, if I take this blue one, which is obviously on the top of my layer stack, and it's obviously in front of everything, and I move it to the very back, you'll see that it doesn't change its actual position, because its position is determined by the XYZ. Okay, so it's actually determined by a depth. Now where this does matter is if we were doing some sort of adjustment layer or a factor or whatever that incorporated other layers into it. All right, so the layer order isn't going to matter for this kind of stuff. This position is going to determine actually what's on top. Okay, so we just have to be aware of that if we want to move something ahead of something else or in front of it, we would just grab that Z direction and adjust it. Okay, so now that I have these 3 items here, it still looks like I probably could have just scaled these things down and positioned them. It doesn't really look like a huge difference. Under my layer, I can make a new camera, and this is where you really see the 3D stuff happening. So on this camera, I'm going to say that I want a 1-node camera because those are easier to deal with, and I'm going to hit OK. Okay, so right now I'm looking through this camera. Okay, I have no animation on anything in my scene. If I hit the space bar, nothing happens. So I'm going to hit P on my camera. I'm going to click on the position. I'm going to go to, let's say, 5 seconds, and then I'm going to scoot my camera over in the X direction. Okay, and what we're going to see here is that this is going to move like it was an actual camera. You can see how these items are actually getting closer to each other. And the reason it's happening is because our camera's position is just moving and kind of aligning those items. Okay, so this is a great way to make like backgrounds. When we do our Angry Birds assignment, we're going to have layers of backgrounds in there in order for it to look like the camera's actually sweeping and the items are at a different distance. This is how we're going to do that. So you can see how we can very quickly just kind of set up these different items. And depending on how far the items are from our camera, I'll move this one a lot closer. And I'll move it down and over. And you see I probably moved this, not yet. There we go. I moved it in front of the other one. Okay, so you can see I'm getting this feel of what's called parallax. Okay, so if you ever like videotape something and you saw like the background items are moving different than the foreground items, driving down the street in the car, and you look out the window, the stuff that's really close to the car is going by really quick, but the stuff that's really, really far off in the distance is kind of staying still, right? So that's where this whole thing comes in handy, is being able to do this. We can also take our camera and we can move it through items. So I'm just going to move these like that, and then maybe push this one back into the background again, like really far back. And then I'll grab this one, leave it there. There we go. Okay, so I'm going to take my camera and I'm going to position it here, like that. That's good. And then for this keyframe, I'm going to position it by the other one. And then for this keyframe, I'm going to position it by the other one. So I'm actually going to go through this one. There we go. Okay, so now I'm actually not just moving and scaling these items, I'm actually kind of flying through the items. I'm going through each one of these spots. And if you remember when we looked at some of the other After Effects things, a lot of those use 3D cameras, but they may not have been apparent because you didn't know what it would look like. If you look at something like and spell things right. There we go. So this is the Fringe opening sequence. Dang it. You got me, YouTube. All right. So what you're going to see is that this is going to be it's going to look like a video, but it's basically a 3D camera that pops out and it's jumping to basically different scenes of our stuff that's happening. It's gorgeous. Come on. There it goes. Just taking its time. All right, so right here we have one composition or one clip of animation that's in there, and then we have this 3D camera that's kind of pulling back. And then as we go to the next scene, see how we flew through all of that stuff. So that wasn't an actual like 3D program, that was just like an After Effects effect happening. Okay, so now we're jumping to a different area, showing some different stuff. And then we'll see that, then we'll fly through some other stuff, and then we'll see more stuff. So all of this is just that camera kind of backing out and showing all of this other stuff happening. Okay, so a lot of these movies will use this very same trick. Where they have this stuff kind of like flying around. And it looks like it's 3D, but it's really just kind of like a fake 3D, which is what After Effects is doing. So this is actual video. This is a mix of 2D and 3D stuff. This is all 2D stuff here. This is all 2D stuff here. Just that camera kind of sweeping around, moving around different items. That's where we're getting that look of it being 3D. So you can see all these little particles. That's what really makes this last one look kind of neat. Right there. See all those little particles floating around? That's another plugin inside of After Effects that will make particles in 3D, and that helps you kind of see the 3D space, which is really, really neat. And there's the particles again. Here's this. There's a vignette going around this. All right. So this is something that's going to be used over and over and over again from this point onward. Okay, so from this point we're going to start using more 3D stuff. So this first assignment we're going to do with 3D is really an introduction to how 3D works, and still creating something kind of neat while we're doing it. All right. So the first thing I want to do is we're going to do, it's called a sign flipping. So we're going to have one sign flip down and another sign and another sign and another sign. Okay. So if I created everything in here, great, I could do that and it would work. But we want to build this workflow of using Illustrator. Illustrator is going to be kind of the backbone of everything that we're doing. So I'm going to go to Illustrator and make a new document. And like we talked about before, if we're doing something for video, we want to set it up for video. We want to set it up for the right resolution that we're using. Oops, 1080. And I want to go to the Advanced tab and turn off this transparency grid, which is horrible. There we go. Okay. So just like we had before, here is our action safe, here is our title safe. So we make sure that we keep our text inside that area. I'm going to make a rectangle like that. And I'm going to just color it basic colors for now. I'll fill it with, that green looks nice. And I'll give it a border, sure. We'll make it like 6, 7, 8 pixels. There we go. Perfect. Okay. So I have this, and then I'm going to type on top of this. Oops. I'm going to type down here and then move it up. Text number 1. So I just typed in text number 1. I'm going to go to my stuff and make this bigger and just drop it right inside here. Perfect. Okay. So what I want to have is something like this. I want to have that and that and that and that. I nearly measured that perfectly. I think I just need to snug this up a little bit. There we go. Perfect. Magic. That one I don't really like the placing, so we'll just scoot that up a little bit. Don't like the placing there. Scoot that up a little bit. Okay. Now anything we do inside of Illustrator we can do, right? So if I wanted to use gradient mesh or gradients or colors or blends or whatever else, I can do all that stuff and it'll translate into After Effects. Okay, so what I need to do is I need to figure out, I want to take this piece of artwork and I want to bring that into After Effects, and I want to animate each piece individually. Okay, right now if I were to bring it would bring in everything as one piece. It would treat this entire thing as one big piece of artwork. I don't want that to happen. So I'm going to go to my layers. There they are. And I'm going to separate each one of these items into a separate layer. So I'm going to grab my text 1. I'm going to make a new layer. I'm going to drag this to my new layer. I'm going to grab my text 2, make a new layer, drag it to the new layer. Go to 3, make a new layer, drag it to the new layer. Okay? And then this one's already on the layer, so that's fine. So I'm just going to make sure that these are typed in what they should be. 3, 4, and 5. Okay? I also want to make sure this is organized here. Oops. So that's going to be number 1. Yep. Because all of this information will translate into After Effects. So it's a lot easier to do it here than have to do that in After Effects. Also, if we were to change something in here and we brought it back into After Effects, it may have a hard time finding it if we change names after the point. Okay? So this looks like that's 5, 4, 3, 1. Perfect. Okay. So I'm going to save this as. I'm going to put this into a folder. I need to go create my folders real quick. So new folder, and this is called sign. There we go. Couldn't think of the word. SignFlipping. And inside of here, I'm going to make an artwork folder, and that's where my artwork's going to go. 200 work, SignFlipping artwork, sign artwork. Okay, so I'm going to save this as an Illustrator file. I'm going to hit save. Everything else should be fine here, so we should hit OK. Now I'm going to go back into After Effects. Now I'm going to import that artwork into After Effects. There we go. All right, so now when this comes in, and I skipped that step, let me go back to that. Before I double click that, there's this import as footage, and we kind of mentioned this last time we were talking about our logos for that lower thirds. We could bring this in as footage, which means take all those layers and flatten them and just give me one piece of artwork. That's not what we want to do. That's what we just talked about. We have composition, retain layer size, and composition. So composition, retain layer size will actually remember the size of each one of those layers. Composition will not. Composition will give me each layer as a big chunk. Most of the time I choose this one, retain layer size. Okay, and this has a lot to do with pivots, which we'll see. So we'll see how that works. So I'm going to hit import with retain layer size on there. I have a composition that comes in, so if I double click it, you'll see that I have a layer with each one of these numbers on it. And if I open this up, here's each one of those imported separately. So what After Effects is actually doing is it imports each one of these layers individually and then puts them into a composition and then make sure they're all positioned nicely. Okay, so that's what it's doing. So I double click that, it brings up a comp that's already sized. If I were to show my action title safe, you'll see that it fits perfectly within my action title safe area, which is wonderful. Okay, and so now what I want to do is animate my signs flipping in. Okay, so if I go here and look at number 1, I want to rotate this thing. Okay, that's how it's going to flip in, is it's going to be like this, and then it's just going to swing down. Okay, that's all it's going to do. In order for me to do that though, I have to make sure the pivot's in the right spot. Right now, it's kind of pivoting from the center of this. And it's also not 3D, so I don't have the ability to have it flip downward. So I'm going to make all of these 3D. And then I'm going to go to my X rotation, and you'll see that's what I want essentially for that to do, is to flip, but I don't want to flip from the center. I want to flip from the top, just like it had a little bar right here, and it would flip down from that bar. So on each one of these, I'm going to move the pivot. So I hit Y, so I can get to the pivot tool. And then I can just drag this up. maybe. Come on. There we go. Let's do one at a time. It's worked before where I've done two at a time. I'm not sure why it's not letting me today. Now we'll notice one thing here. You see where my pivot is? It's actually not lined up with the top bar, right? It's kind of off a little bit. So what I need to do is I need to line it up with exactly where I want this to be. So I'm just going to pull it down until it's right on that line. Okay? Here or there, it's not really going to matter too much as long as it's close enough. So I'll grab number 2 and do the same thing. Move it in line with that line. I'll grab number 3 and do the same exact thing. I'll go to 4. And then finally 5. There we go. Okay. All right, so now all the pivots are in the right spot. So if I go here, make them all 3D, and if I went to my rotate, and I go to my X rotate, you can see how now they're all going to rotate from the top. So it's going to look like they're hinged at the top and then they swing down. That's what they should look like. So I want to animate one of these first. I want to set up number 1, make sure it looks good, and then just copy that animation to all the other ones. That's the easiest way to do that. So I'm just going to hide all the others. I'm going to hit R for rotation. Just like everything else we've done before, we set keys. Now you'll see there's an orientation here. So this rotation here and this rotation here for what we're doing are essentially the same exact thing. Okay? But I'm going to stick with the rotation and the orientation I use for other stuff. So I'm going to set a key just on the X rotation. I'm going to come up about a second. Oops. I want it to start back off, like there. There we go. That's how I want it to start, and then I'll come up a little bit, and then I'll rotate it down. Now it's going to be boring if I do this. Okay, so that's an incredibly boring animation. Even if I went into my speed graph and I edited my speed graph, it would still be boring, okay? Because what we want to happen is this kind of like gradual stopping. The sine has some weight to it, it comes in, and then it gradually stops, and then we're good. So instead of going right to 0 here, I'm actually going to overshoot. So it swings in, and then it goes past where it would be, okay? So now I'm at like -26. Then I'm going to go up a little bit more, and I'm going to go back again. I'm going to go past 0 and go to, let's say, +15. And I go a little bit more to -5, sure. And then I'll go more, 3. And then maybe I'll go to -1 if I can get there. So close. Type it in. And then for my last keyframe, I'm going to go with 0. All right, so let me hit N to end my work area. So now if we look at this, we'll see that we get something that is definitely not exciting at all still, okay? My timing is still off, okay? You're never going to get your timing right. You always have to tweak your timing, okay? This happens way too slow. This is meant to be just like done, right? This was an entrance to a web page we would have left already. So I want to take all my keyframes here and just start pushing them in. So I'm grabbing all of them and just pushing them in. Now what should happen is that the distance between each set of keyframes should get less and less and less. If our item is starting up here and swinging down, that takes however long it takes. But then when it swings back this way, that should take less time. And then when it swings back this way, less time, less time, less time, less time. Okay. So I'm just going to zoom in, and we're just going to keep tweaking this and pushing it in. That's still too long. That's like a second. That's way too long. Gotta get this in here. There we go. Maybe 2 seconds is a good amount of time. Okay. Now, I don't know what happened to my first keyframe here. Why aren't you back to where you were? I'll just reset you. There we go. All right. All right, so that's not as bad. I still think we need to adjust some stuff, okay? So right now, everything is still linear keyframes. Just go from here to here to here to here. I need to easy ease all of this stuff, okay? And for something like this, we literally can just do easy ease on it all and not have to touch anything else, okay? There's no speed here because the item isn't gonna like speed up and get there and then crash into it. It's just going to speed up and then slow down, and then speed up and slow down, and speed up and slow down. Okay, so that looks okay. I still think I need to squeeze some of this time in here. Oops, too far in. So let me grab this again, and I'll squeeze this a little bit further. And you'll see how it's just a matter of just noticing, hey, something's wrong here, and then going through and tweaking it. Okay, so now I'm under 2 seconds. I'm at like 1 second and like 15 frames. All right, so that looks all right. I still think I want to speed it up a little bit more. You can't be afraid to go in there and look at stuff. Sometimes you have to really make things really drastic in order for you to see what's working and what's not working. So sometimes I'll actually like scrunch this into like 1 second just to see if I like that better. And if I don't, maybe I'm a little bit closer than I was inching it in. And that one. Okay, so now I'm at about 1 second. Okay, and I like that better. I like this transition a lot better than the old one. Maybe I want to adjust some of my other stuff, like it comes down like this. Maybe I don't like how low that goes. I'm just going to pull that up a little bit more. Here we go. So that's going to go to negative 48. And then this one will go to positive 33. And that one will go to negative. Okay. So now let's see how that looks. There we go. So I like the way that looks. I like the motion of it. Now, we don't have motion blur on this yet, right? That's another thing that we could add to this that would enhance the look of this item. So just for fun, let's turn motion blur on, preview it. There it goes. So now you can see we have motion blur on there, and it definitely looks a lot nicer having motion blur on this, having that nice little soft edge as it comes down. We could adjust this further if we went to our comp settings and we started to play with that shutter angle. There we go. So you see how I pulled that up and I'm getting more and more motion blur? Okay, so if I need to enhance the motion blur, definitely pull it up just so it's a little bit more obvious what's happening. All right, so now what I need to do is I need all of my signs to do this. Okay, all of my signs need to flip exactly like this. So I'm going to copy this animation. Okay, so I just rewound it to the beginning, clicked on Rotate X, and copied. Then if I go to all of these and just hit Control V, what should happen is it should automatically paste that animation right on top of the other ones. So all of those X rotations for 2 through 5 are now pasted in there. So I don't have to reanimate each one of those, which is wonderful. And then I'm going to grab the eyeballs to turn them all on. Okay? And we're going to notice obviously something very wrong with what happens here. Okay? So what's happening here that shouldn't be happening here? Right. They're all coming down from their own spot. Right? So what they should happen is they should be linked together, kind of like a chain link sign. You were to hold it up and let go, and it would just kind of flap in the breeze kind of thing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the end of this, right here, and I'm going to parent I'm going to parent each sign to the one above it. Okay? So number 5, I'm going to go to the parenting strip and say you're parented to number 4. Number 4, I'm going to say you're parented to number 3. Number 3, you're parented to number 2. Number 2, you're parented to number 1. And number 1 doesn't have anything above it, so I'm not going to parent anything. Now, let's watch and see what happens. Okay? Because of how this is set up, now all these signs are kind of coming in all at the same time at that right spot. So now what I'm going to do is just offset the time. Okay? Because right now everything happens at the same time. It's kind of boring. So just like we've done in everything else, we'll just scoot this over a little bit, scoot this over a little bit, scoot this over a little bit, scoot that over a little bit. Okay, and now we're getting another look to how the sign is coming out. I don't think I'm liking how that's coming out. Let me just see. I think 2 should probably be delayed by another frame or so. There we go. 3's coming out like that. There's 4. Oops. I think 5 probably come out a little bit sooner. There we go. Okay, so let's try that. There we go. That seems to work. Okay. I didn't like how the dynamic didn't feel like it was on. Like as a sign was swinging this way, it worked, but then some of them came out right at the end and just didn't seem like it fit right. Where now it feels like as the 1 swings down, it's pushing 2, and 2's pushing 3, and 3, 4, and 4, 5. That's how it's feeling now. Okay, so let me save this. I hit save, we just have to wait, I guess. Maybe it'll crash, maybe not. So let's save this into my SignFlipping. Sartona underscore. Alright. Everything's good here. Okay, cool. So now that I have this working, this is perfect. Now I can go back to Illustrator and I can change this. So any changes I do to this, as long as all my naming is the exact same thing from Illustrator to After Effects, it should update perfectly. So if I go in here and I type in something else, like if I was making a sign for a restaurant, I could do stuff like pizza. It's too close to lunch probably for this, but. And then I'll pick a fancy font. There we go. Pizza. Perfect. And I'm just going to copy pizza and paste it here just so I can get the font. And then burgers. Oops. Sure. And Pepsi. Yeah, Pepsi products there. All right, and then I can go into each one of these. Oops, not you. I want you. There we go. And I could change their color. That, and then maybe I want to get rid of these outlines, so I can get rid of the outlines. And then maybe I want to change the font color. Nope. There we go. So let's pretend that that works. So now I'm going to hit save. Perfect. I go back to After Effects, and now you'll see that it's updated it. Now, why is it offset? It's stupid, that's why. I don't know why I did that. It should not have done that. Possibly because I took the stroke away, it didn't like that. But no big deal, because my position doesn't have any keyframes, so I just go to the end of it, and then I go to my X, and then I just move that. So I could just set this to 360, perfect. And then I scoot this one over. And if it's hard to see with these little outlines here, you can turn your outlines off. Nope, maybe not. There we go, there we go. Scoot this one over so it's lined up. Okay, so spend a couple minutes and just kind of reline these up, and then we should be good. There we go. Okay, so now everything's back to being lined up. And if I needed to, something like you see the spacing between pizza and burgers is different than the rest of it, I could just grab number 2 here and just scoot that up in the Y direction. And that should fix all of that. There we go. Okay, so very quickly I was able to just jump into Illustrator, change my colors, change my fonts, change my text, bring it back into After Effects, and pretty much everything was good except for the positioning. If I did go back in and just change the colors again, we shouldn't run into that same issue because I don't have anything else going on. So now it's, that. There we go. So we'll save this, jump back to here, and it updates everything. Okay, so that's the kind of workflow you want to build, even if you don't have your full text, full whatever set up. As long as you have that outline of where it's going to be, you can still do all of this stuff. So a lot of times you may not have the artwork from a client. You have an idea of what the artwork is. You have positions. You can set up all the animations and get everything ready to go. So when they give you the artwork, it's just a matter of updating it, and then you're happy to go. So to finish this project, I don't want to just leave it like this because it's kind of boring. Right? It's just pretty boring. So I'm going to make a new camera. One node is perfect. Okay. I need to adjust my camera. So remember up here we have these camera tools. So if I hit C, it'll cycle through all of these, or you can just use the unified one. And this allows you to spin around or zoom in and out or reposition your stuff. Okay, so I'm using Alt as my way to do that. Alt left mouse button spins around. Alt middle mouse button does this, tracking. And Alt right mouse button allows me to zoom in and out. So what I can do is just kind of position this in a way that creates something a little bit more dynamic. Sir?
Can the orbit one be like a 360 type thing?
What do you mean?
The orbit camera?
Oh, this one? Oh, no, that's just this tool to spin around. That's what that's doing. So when I go to Unified, it's all 3 of these. I just have to use hotkeys to get to them. That way I don't have to keep switching. All right, so let's say something like this is good. Like that. Okay, so that looks pretty neat. Now I can go to my camera's position and rotation. Oops. This is where I would use orientation for this. And I can set up some keyframes just to kind of reposition this. And then you can see how we can animate that camera moving too. Or I can swap it and have it go the other way. And I'll just set this up so that maybe it's a little bit higher. There we go. Yes, sir.
Are we going to do like a post at the side and not?
You could do that too. You could make a picture of a post and just drop it right in next to it and just make sure it's lined up, and you could do that as well. Last semester, a couple people did some different things with this entire concept. Because once you have 3D and you have this whole idea of how this stuff works, think about like, there's those boxes that get made like that. You could animate a box actually being built kind of like in fake 3D in After Effects and having it spin around. When you look at some of the geometric shapes in there, it's very, very similar stuff. There we go. So just to kind of show a quick example, if I go to a...
So could you kind of make like a Roadrunner scene? Like
Yes.
how far back?
Mm-hmm. Actually, I'll show that next time. I have some other scenes I'll show with this. So now I have a camera that kind of moves. I'm going to also make a adjustment layer, and I just want to do a color correction. Some cool things to play with in here too. At the college we have these things called Magic Bullet looks. So if you wanted to play with Magic Bullet looks, you could do that. And this is essentially like an Instagram type thing for After Effects. So instead of it just being like very boring colors that you've chosen, it helps you give some variation and some excitement to it. Now they are only at the college, so if you went home to work, you obviously wouldn't have these plugins there. So off to the side here, here's all the different ones you could do. So here's warm haze. And you can see how it added these little extra features to it. So like we talked about with vignettes and whatever else, you could do that automatically. It just automatically creates these kinds of things. Here's halogen. It's kind of neat. Street light. Okay, and once I have one I like, I just hit finished, and then it drops it in. Okay. Now one thing this isn't really doing for me right now is if we look at this, this looks very flat in how it's coloring all of this. Because we're dealing with a 3D environment, let me turn that off for a second. Because we're dealing with a 3D environment, what we could do too is add some lights into the scene to add a little bit more realism to it. So if I go to layer new, I can actually add a light to this. And I'll just do a parallel light for now. Okay, and so the light has a position, so I'm just going to hit position. I'm going to move it until it's way out here. That's too far. There we go. And then I'm going to rotate it. No, maybe not rotate it. No, change the point of interest. Okay, so this is controlling where the light is shining on. And if I go to my light options, I could turn on things like the intensity, crank it up. I could turn on shadows. And so as my stuff falls, you'll see how we now get a little bit more effect to it instead of it just being this kind of like flat animation. It feels a little bit more depthy. Okay, we could soften the shadows too so they're not as dark, because like right there, that shadow is pretty dark. Okay, fall off distance. No, I'll leave that as none. There we go. Oops. And sometimes you need to add more than one light. I think in this case I'd probably want to add just another light in the scene. And then just change its point of interest just to kind of hit in a different direction. Oops. It's just hitting weird, so I'm just going to ignore that. Okay. Alright, so now I've added my light to it, then I can add my looks. There we go. Okay, if I need to edit my looks, I can just go to edit and then pick a different look. Cool. Alright, so you can create some very, very neat stuff just using this very basic 3D concept. So with this assignment, what I want you to do is do this one like that. Do exactly what I've done, just so you have something to follow along to. Once you're comfortable with the steps, once you're comfortable doing what I've done, then make something that's completely different that's your own, okay? Using the same kind of 3D stuff.